On today's episode of Franchise Canada Chats, we have a very special episode with co-owner of Boston Pizza, Jim Treliving. This one was so special, we even brought in an additional host, John DeHart, Chief Strategist of Franchise Growth Lab.
Today, you'll hear John talk with Jim about his unconventional path into franchising, his secret career to fund his entrepreneurial pursuits, his growth path to 100 plus units, and the Dragon's Den days.
This is a great one. Enjoy the episode.
Faye, and I'm here with the great Jim Treliving, co-founder, chairman of Boston Pizza, of course, one of the original Dragon's Den members. Jim, awesome to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Nice to be here. And looking forward to this, actually, from a Penticton boy. So.
Yeah, well, let's start there. I want to go back to the beginning, and I know you were an RCMP member. You bought your first franchise, and your first franchise was in Penticton, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I was the first franchisee at Boston Pizza. I was actually stationed in Edmonton, and I bought the franchise when we were there with another policeman who was in the Edmonton City Police.
Well, I remember you and I had a conversation years ago. And I grew up in Penticton, and I think we were at Sarah McLaughlin's backyard party. She used to host those great backyard parties with
4 or 5 years ago. Yeah,
no, 5 years ago. And at that party, I said, you sponsored my very first hockey team, the Boston Pizza Brutes. This would have been going back, I bet, 1977. And you asked, said, John, do you have a picture? I couldn't find a picture, but I found a picture. So let me see if I can show you the picture. You see that?
Oh my gosh.
I'm right there in the middle. Now, the funny thing about this picture, so the Boston Pizza Brutes, funny thing about this picture, you'll also see other jerseys called Robbie's, I think, Datsun. So I'm assuming in the early days of Boston Pizza, you probably were short on money.
That's an understatement. Yeah, we were short of money, but we were using every method we could to survive. Let me put it that way. And it's an interesting story when we started.
Started with $5,000. My partner and I each had $5,000. And the most amazing thing with all this is that we had to go and get some more money. So we ended up going to the Federal Development Bank up in Kelowna, which was backed by the Canadian government. So the first question they asked me when I walked into the room was, Jim, I know that you're, to get a loan from us, you have to be turned down by at least 2 banks. I said, I've got all 5 that turned me down. So that's how we got the loan, and we ended up dealing with him, and that was how we opened the first Boston Pizza in Penticton in 1968. And then about 2 months later, we were sitting downstairs. It was a furniture store. It had been a furniture store for years. And there was this big basement down below us. And so we decided in their wisdom that, we'll throw a couple of tables and chairs down here and we'll use it as overflow on a Friday or Saturday night. Well, that turned out to be we couldn't do that. We didn't have a liquor license at the time. We had to apply for one. So we applied for a liquor license. And the next thing we knew, we got the first Okanagan nightclub that was in the Okanagan, and we had to go to Victoria to get interviewed and so on and so forth. Then we had churches that were telling us you can't do this because it's too close to the high school and all the things like that. Anyway, we ended up getting the license, and we opened on July the 23rd, 1968 with a nightclub, the first one in the Okanagan. And we were allowed a 3-piece band, but they couldn't sing. You can imagine. And we were lined up and packed and so on and so forth. And people I think we had to go 3 months without having any singers. And then we finally got a singer. And then we progressed to having a 5-piece band that was made up of local kids that worked at the high school called the Great Canadian River Race. And the Redivo brothers that they had, their dad was a photographer and so on. And we had a great group that came together, and Meikle-John his dad was the architect in town. Duncan Meikle-John was the lead singer, and we had a ball with those guys. So they went on to do big things as well in the band business. But that's how we got started.
Right.
It's
And so
amazing.
what you're really saying is Boston Pizza wouldn't be here today if you didn't start out with a nightclub, because I bet that floated your restaurant operations until you became a successful restaurateur.
John, you're right down to the line. What happened is that we did $52,000 roughly in the pizza business for a year after we opened, and in the nightclub we did about 180, and that got us through till all of a sudden we built a second one. We built one at Kamloops and we opened Boston Pizza over there in the basement again, and then we realized this is not, we're going to have two of these and that's all we'll ever get, because there's so much work in it with bands and so on and so forth. And of course, the main store that we had opened, the second store we had opened, actually was in Prince George, where I'd been stationed as a mounted policeman. And that's what took off. I mean, it was so busy up there. We just could hardly keep up. And so that was the big change.
Jim, I love hearing these stories about entrepreneurs who struggle financially in the early days. And I want to ask you this because I heard a story. I don't know if it's true or if it's myth. Were you a wrestler at one point? Did you have to raise money through wrestling? I want to hear the goods here if it's true.
It's true. My family didn't know about it for years. In fact, I was on Dragon's Den one day, and the Hart family out of Calgary come on, and they asked me. They knew who I was. They knew that I'd wrestled, but nobody else had known. I'd kept it a pretty quiet secret because you got to remember, I was wearing a mask.
Yeah.
And we were called the Hangman, and there was two of us, and we had a great time. And I was working with the Osborne brothers out of Edmonton at the time. Did it for 2 years, and it paid a few bills, and it wasn't a lot till I got hurt, and then my career was over. But we had a lot of fun with it, and it was a lot of good times. And the most amazing thing was they come on the show 30 years, 40 years later, and brought this up, and my wife turned to my daughter and said, "Did your dad wrestle?" And she said, "I don't know. I'll have to phone my mom." So she phoned her mother, and he said he did, but we kept it a secret for years.
That is classic. So if you ever can share a picture someday with us, I'll return the favor of my Boston Pizza Brutes picture.
I don't know. I think we burnt all the pictures. I don't know. Kept them they've been out of sight for a long time.
Okay, good. Well, so you ended up funding. Prince George became successful. You went on and you bought more franchises before you became the franchisor. Can you just walk us through that? Yeah.
What we did was, when we originally come out of Edmonton, my partner and I, Don Spence was his name. So we formed a company called S&T Holdings, named after our initials of our last names. And of course, S comes before T, so it was S&T Holdings. And Don was in the business for a number of years with me, but then he left. And but what we did is we started opening the stores, and we were the biggest franchisee that Boston Pizza had. Remember, the family didn't know anything about the Adjaritas family didn't know anything about franchising. So I had a lawyer that I knew in Edmonton. His father was an MLA there. It was McCann was his last name, and he helped me put the franchise agreement together for Gus Adjaritas and his family. And it was based on Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dairy Queen were the only two franchises basically out there. And so we took pieces of every one of them, and that's became the Boston Pizza franchise agreement. And we had a great partner, and our franchisor, Gus Adjaritas was his name, and his family. They were really good with us too, because there was months we couldn't pay the franchise fee. We weren't taking enough money in until we hit Prince George, and then that's when the world changed. And then we started opening stores after that, and we ended up with 15 stores of our own in British Columbia. We weren't allowed to come to the Lower Mainland, but we could do all the interior and wherever we wanted to go. And Gus and those guys in Edmonton, they were Greek immigrants. In fact, Gus was illegally in the country when I found out about it in Edmonton. We had to get him registered, so I helped him do that. Anyway, part of the whole thing was that at the end of the day was we got to open these stores and do really well. And as we built them more and more, we were starting coming closer and closer to the Lower Mainland, like Chilliwack and Abbotsford and places like this later on. And then we had a chance Gus sold the business to a group in Edmonton called the Miller family, and a guy by the name of Ron Coyle, who was an ex-bank manager from the Toronto Dominion Bank. And Ron was a great friend of ours, still is to this day. And his partner and he were running the business when his partner passed away 6 months after he bought the business from Gus. So we went back and forth, and I helped him with, we went over and spent time in Edmonton helping him keep going with the business. And then he came in one day, and we were driving in from the airport. I picked him up from Edmonton. We're driving downtown to take him to the hotel, the Four Seasons downtown. And he said, I'm going to sell the company. He said, why don't you guys buy it? And I said, sure, let's do it. And by the time we got to the Four Seasons from the airport, we had agreed to buy the company. We hadn't had a number yet. We got a rough idea what the number was. We weren't happy with it. We're going to negotiate, but we were going to buy the company. When he got out of the car, by that time, I'd taken on, Don had left the business, Don Spence had left the business, and I'd hired my accountant, whose name was George Melville. And he worked for Pete Marwick at that time, which became KPMG. And he turned around and he said, when I got out of the car, Gus got out of the car, or Ron got out of the car, Ron walked away and he turned to me and he said, Jim, did you just say we're buying Boston Pizza and from Gus? And I said, yeah. He said, where are we going to get the money? I said, well, he didn't ask us anything about that. I said, we're going to buy it. We'll have to figure that out. So he said, we don't have the money, but we're going to buy Boston Pizza. And I said, yeah. I said, we'll figure it out. So that's how it started. And then I had friends of mine that owned the Richmond Inn. I coached hockey at that time. My son was on the hockey team with the son of one of the owners of the Richmond Inn. And I went to him and I asked him if he would lend us the money to buy Boston Pizza. And he said, well, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, you'll own 50%, we'll own 50%. You put up all the cash and we'll put up all the work. And we promise that we will pay you back whatever it is that you loaned to us. So that's how the deal was done. So we negotiated that the price would be around $3 million, and we would pay it over time at a 10% interest, if you can imagine, in those days. And that was how we started.
It's amazing. How many franchises did Boston Pizza have at that time?
Boston Pizza had 32. They had Edmonton, and they had a couple of stores in one in Winnipeg, two in Winnipeg, I think, and at that time, and one in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and the rest were in Alberta and BC.
And did you have 15 of them at that time?
We had 15 in ours. We had the same amount as Boston Pizza had at that time.
Right.
So about 32 stores at the time.
So now you're a franchisor.
Yes.
And
we moved, and we had to move. We were still in Penticton, so we moved down to the West Coast. That was when we bought the company. And we decided, George Melville was the name, and George and I decided at that time we'd be 50-50 partners. And when we bought the company, he said, because he was only a 20 at that time, and Don was gone. Don Spence was gone. Down to the West Coast, we got into an office here, and we said we were going to franchise everything. And we franchised the stores we had, which were 15. We took our managers and asked them if they could go and borrow some money from their parents or whatever, and bring another partner in with money and buy us out of each of the locations. Prince George, Kamloops, Prince Rupert, you name them. We were all over the country. Penticton, Kelowna, Vernon, all those places were all franchised over a period of a couple of months.
What year was that? Just so we have context here.
1983.
1983. Okay. So you started franchisee 67, 1983.
1968, we opened our first store as the first franchise. And it was a franchise agreement. That was the only franchise store the Greeks had. They had 3 stores in Edmonton at that time. And I lived just down the street from where they were. I was taken there for the first time way back in 67, 66. So it was a different, it was just pizza and pasta. Our menu, if you had a look at the menu, I still got a copy of it. And it's amazing how small it was. We had 21 pizzas, 20, and the Boston Royal was 21. We had 3 We had spaghetti meatballs, we had ravioli meatballs, and we had lasagna. And it was the other thing. And we had pop. We had no liquor licenses at those when we opened our first store.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So I love talking about the emerging franchisor space.
Yeah.
I know it took you guys about 35 years, I think, to get to 100 units. And just, I mean, in this country, 95% of franchisors in this country are still under 50 units. The average franchise system never grows past 10 units. When I sold my stake in Nurse Next Door, this is why I founded the Franchise Growth Lab. This problem in Canada has driven me crazy, that we struggle to scale in this country. So if we go back to when you were an emerging franchisor in those early days, you're at 40. I want you to answer why do most franchisors struggle to grow to 40, 50, 60, 70 units on their way to 100 units? Why do we have so much trouble growing as a franchisor?
I think there's two things. And I was very fortunate to have a really great partner in George Melville. George is no longer my partner. We split after 3 years ago. He just wanted to retire. We had 46 years together. Great guy, great personality. Can't say enough about him. He was the financial piece. I was the entrepreneur that's saying George made a comment one day. He said, "Jim, you're on the way to the moon. I just want to go halfway." And I said, because, you're thinking of a word you want to do. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And I think that's what really drove me, is to think that there isn't anything we can't do. And I say the word can't very seriously, because my grandmother came to me when I was a very young boy. And I said, "Grandma, I can't do that." She said, she was a little Irish lady. And she turned to me and she said, "There's no such word in the dictionary. You can do anything you want." And I don't want to ever hear that word "can't" again in your life. And I, from that day forth, never used the word again, because I thought, well, I can do this. Here's what we should try. And I think that's with entrepreneurs today. The other thing is that we weren't successful the first time we leaped out of the province or out of the western side. We went to Ontario and we closed 3 stores and came back home after Expo 86. And it was the reasons being is that we didn't know the territory. We were a Western-based company. When you flew back to Toronto to this day, you'd use a day. So when you go back there, you get on a plane here at 2 in the afternoon or 8 in the morning, you get there at 4 in the afternoon. The day's gone. So you don't have control. There's a completely different mentality back there. Vice versa for the people in the East coming west. They get on a plane and they arrive here, and they leave there at 7 o'clock in the morning, which is really 3 hours. There's a 3-hour time change. So they're leaving actually at 4 in the morning, our time. They arrive here at 8 and we're just going to work. They're ready to, the day's over for them. So you had this whole thing that was completely different from what we were trying. Yes, Western Canada, that was what we could do. And when you look at people that have come west from the East, they had the same problem as we had when we went East. What the difference was, when we decided to expand, we'd done what we thought a lot of work in the West. We were very concentrated in Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, but nothing beyond Thunder Bay. One guy in Ontario told me, "Well, Thunder Bay is not in Manitoba." I said, "Yeah, but it should have been, because it's not related to anything in the lower part in the Toronto area." So when we went back there, we lost 3 stores. And I remember coming back on the plane after I was told by the bank that, take your little company and go back west, because you're not going to make it here. And the reason we tried to run it from here, we tried to run it from Vancouver. You had to open, and we didn't know the market back there. And that was the whole key. I think the same thing with when you're coming from west to east. Remember when we were going back there, the biggest thing was that people work in shifts. People were coming to a restaurant out in Western Canada. They didn't get there till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, mostly 8. If you're a Westerner, you're sitting there, somebody will say, "When are you going to dinner?" Well, 7:30. In the East, they get up at 6:30, go to work, 7 o'clock, 7:30, They get home at 3, pick their kids up. What's the first thing to do? They got to feed them before they go to bed.
Right.
We saw people coming to our restaurant. We were jammed. We couldn't handle the volumes. We had ovens, were deck ovens where you pulled it out with a shovel, like a wooden stick, and cut our pizzas. Well, we had to have something faster. These people are taking their kids home. So there was a whole mentality that we had to change, and equipment. So that's why the difference is, and there's huge differences. What we changed the next time we went back, and I said to George, the next time we're not going back there. We're the heck with the East. We're not going to go and do anything back there. The heck with them. Well, that lasted about 2 weeks in my mind. And I went back and I said, I know what we did wrong. We were wrong. The banker was right. We were wrong. We weren't prepared to go back there. We didn't know the country. We didn't know the lay of the land. And we didn't know our customer. So when we went back the next time, we went back with a franchisee. We had an office there. We opened, we got to know what was going, what time you go to work, what time you come home, how fast we can get this stuff out. We changed everything. And that's how we became successful. When they told me we couldn't open any stores in Ontario, today we got 130 stores in Ontario. So it does work. And what you had to do is understand the lay of the land. No different for the people coming out. I know friends of mine that got 50, 60 stores in the Ontario market. They come out here and I had the head of Tim Hortons, Ron Joyce, said to me, what's the matter with you people in the West? You buy one donut, one half coffee. Back here, they buy a dozen donuts. And I said, Ron, we are always worrying about our waistline. And we laughed about it because that was his mentality, was he couldn't wait until he moved west. He actually left there and moved and opened an office in Calgary. And that what changed the world for him. The same thing that happened when we went east. Our first store, the second time we went back, I remember sitting with 2 people from very good friends of mine from Molson's. And I said to one of the guys, there's going to be another store opening here. You guys are going to have competition for Tim Hortons. And he said, who's that? I said, a company called Starbucks. They're out of Seattle. And he said, oh, no, they'll never work back here. Surprise, surprise. And that became because there was a new customer. They weren't going after the customer. It was at Tim Hortons. They were going after the young, new person that comes in with a whole new language of having a latte with da-da-da-da-da-da. And they never, going into Tim Hortons, it was, double sugar, double cream. That was about the double, is what you'd hear. Again, they looked at the market and said, there's a whole market. There's a young generation coming up. And remember, Starbucks come out of Seattle based on 2 guys working out of university. Their ages were a big piece of it. So I think there's a lot of lessons to learn on when you want to expand and how you expand. And you got to be making money before you can do that. Your franchisees have got to make money.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what you just said. I think there's a lot of learning there. A lot of franchisors do make that leap and do struggle. I know when we franchised in Ontario for the first time, we struggled. When we franchised in the US for the first time, we struggled. Yep. So I think what you're saying is, and I often get asked the question, why is it so different? What you're saying is the consumer behavior is just different in different parts of the country. And it wasn't until you figured that out and you got that right, were you able to successfully launch in Ontario. Did you also move to Ontario?
Yeah. And that was the second time. When we got into this, I went back and I lived in a hotel for a while and at the Four Seasons in Toronto. And I got up one day, it was a long weekend. We hadn't any stores in there. We were looking for them. And I was trying to get a ticket to a baseball game. Didn't know anybody. And it was a long weekend. So I got up and I went downstairs and I talked to the concierge. And I said, where the heck is everybody? It's dead. A long weekend in Vancouver or the Okanagan, it's packed.
Yeah.
He said, well, they've gone north.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, north? You guys are in the south. What do you mean north? You don't know what north is? And he said, no, they've gone north, Jim. And I said, what's up north? He said, lakes. I'd never knew of anything called Muskoka. I didn't know any of that. But the whole of Toronto seemed to have moved out of there for 3 days. The highways going to the Muskokas were packed. I didn't know anything about the Muskokas. What happened was a friend of mine in Edmonton who was originally from Ontario phoned me when I was trying to get these tickets, and he said, why don't you go up north? I said, you're the second guy that's told me about this north of Toronto. He said, well, I got one of my guys that works with me. He said, he'll come and pick you up and take you up there. And I thought, oh, okay. But I was on my own. I'd rather stay in the city. But anyway, I said, I'll go. And I had visions, this guy's going to show up with his wife and the kids and the dogs. Surprise, surprise. He showed up with the kids and the dogs and the whole shooting match. I get in the vehicle, sit in the back, and we drive for 2.5 hours north. I went over before that and went to Canadian Tire, and I bought a sleeping bag, hibachi, and a couple other items to help, because when I went up north somewhere in British Columbia, or when I was in Manitoba and I grew up, we went to the lake, I always had a sleeping bag. We drove, and his wife and him sat in the front. And I'll never forget, we drove for 2.5 hours. We get up there and they laughed the whole way. They never said a word to me, just laughed when I put the stuff in the back of the minivan with their kids and the dog. We got there and they drove down this dirt road, and I said, oh my gosh, am I ever glad I brought my good sleeping bag. All of a sudden they come out and they open out right next to the lake, this magnificent, beautiful cottage. I didn't have every clue. And that's again, not knowing the territory.
Yeah.
So when they got there, the first question he said to me, he turned to me and he said, Jim, and they both laughed. And he said, Jim, you can get a refund on your stuff when you get back on Monday. But you had fun with it.
Yeah. So you moved to Ontario, and so I'm assuming a lot of your franchise growth happened in Ontario after that.
It did. And it was, we opened a small office. I hired a guy to run the company. He was an American, actually. But he had married a Canadian girl, and his name was Mark Pacinda, and he had left. He had been trained by KFC. He'd been to Australia, come back, young guy. He was running Arby's for them for a while, and then I hired him through an agency. And his wife was from Oakville, and at the same time, this was 1985, I guess it was at that time, 84, 85. And not 85, 94, 95. And so I was looking at, getting involved with that, going back and forth. After we started with that, once we opened the office, once we started doing that, we looked at, do we sell 5 or 6 territorial franchises, or do we go like we did in Western Canada, 1, 1, 1, 1, or 2, 2, 2, if a franchisee wanted to, but you had to prove yourself with the first one. We tried for 6 months or a year, 8 months, we tried to do it in tranches of 4 to 6 units, and that didn't work. Let's go back to 1. So we did, and we sold a bunch right away. And Mark, at that time, I think we had 1 year where we opened 14. He had sold 14 franchises. We thought, wow, we've never done this before in our lives. Well, as this grew, and as we saw the market grow, and we were not in downtown Toronto, we were in the suburbs when we were opening. We opened a corporate store as well in Oakville to train people and to run as an operation. That was the first when we really decided that we're in the business, in the sense of we have to train people in the new territory, and we got to have the right equipment. We got to have conveyor ovens instead of deck ovens, and on this went. That was the second time going into Ontario. We were very successful. So when he got to 14, 15 locations more, we just knew that this thing was going to grow like crazy, because we were going into places that nobody else was going, even in Ontario. They were all staying around the metro area, doing very well. Most of the franchises we met, but we went into small areas, the tall town, and grew. What we used to say, we grew without within, and coming back towards the city. And that was what we saw, as we were the major restaurant in those towns or cities. So it worked for us.
So, I mean, on this path to 100 units, growth is hard. And I always say I call it the 10, 25, 50 trap. Virtually every franchisor struggles to get past 10. If they get past 10, they struggle at 25. Get past 25, they struggle at 50 on their path to 100. And the reality is, as a company, when you grow, you have to change at every level to get to that next level. So as a franchisor to get to those 100 units, what are some of the must-have systems when you grew Boston Pizza from that 40-ish to the 100 stage as a franchisor? What were the real key systems that you had to master as a franchisor to get there successfully?
John, you mentioned the one word in there, and it's called systems. What we did is we put our systems in place. We wouldn't let you change. When we brought the Boston Brood out, we weren't letting you change it to whatever you want, make a sub.
My favorite sandwich, by the way. Love the Boston.
Yeah. And the great hockey team they had too.
Great hockey team. Best name in all of hockey, the Brutes.
That's right. That's right. And I said is systems are the whole key to the system, the whole business. The systems we put in place, then we hired great people to run those systems. You can't run it by yourself. Where a lot of people are, especially entrepreneurs, they decide that I can do this and I can do that and I can do this and I can do it. We had a head of marketing, we had of operations, we had of HR. You have to have all those things in place. Then when you put those heads of state in, they have to hire underneath them. We had 4 salesmen working out of Toronto just for the eastern part of Canada. Out of that office, their whole sole purpose was to sell franchises, not to be part doing something else. You can't have your operations guy, oh, I'll sell franchises as well. No, it doesn't work. And you have to commit to that. Now, I can remember sitting on talking to my guys back in Western Canada, including my partner George, on a video one day, and he said, "Jim, we're losing almost $1 million this year because of we got sales of new stores coming. It's costing us over $1 million." And I said, "Yeah, George, but we have to spend money to make money." And he said, "Well, I don't know how long we can last doing this." And I said, "As soon as those other stores open here, we won't have to worry about that." And that's exactly what happened. You have to set up in the area. We've done it with the United States. We've done it with Mexico. And we have an office there and a president there in both countries. We have a president here. We have an infrastructure that's set up with a management team that Brad and my daughter and a whole team looks after the 3 presidents. So if you don't do that, if you don't put the infrastructure together, it'll collapse on you, or you just can't expand because you're working it full time on 2 jobs.
Yeah, I think there's an important lesson in there for every franchisor or entrepreneur. I think we all struggle with when do we cede control and where do we cede control? So you said you hired a CEO pretty early on.
Yeah, we when we were partnerships way back when, we brought in a chief financial officer, and that was George Melville. When my partner left, he was a 20% owner. At that point, I owned 80. So when we bought Boston Pizza, it was after we signed the agreement. George looked at me and he said, "So do I get more of this?" And I said, No, George, you don't get more. You get half. We're 50-50 partners going. It costs you $0. All you got to do is work your butt off. You're the financial side. You look after that side. I'll look after the other side. So we knew right from day one, again, going back to infrastructure, we probably didn't know what we were doing other than that's how we wanted to operate.
Yeah.
But we realized that we each had their separate jobs. And what we did is, if you looked at our offices to this day, there was a little ante room between each job. One, and I have one that was connected with a little meeting room. And we used to meet and we talk about what we had to do. I never worried about whether the checks were being paid or we were making any money or whatever. All I knew was I had to have this ready for me and he had to have it ready for him. So we would sit at the end of the month. He'd tell me whether we lost money or made money. I'd sit there and say, we're opening 14 or 18 new stores. At one point back in the, I think it was probably in the mid 90s, we got, or late 90s, 5 stores one year. And the next year we opened 30. And the next year after that was 25. So if we hadn't have the infrastructure, we couldn't have done that. We would have never got to where we are now, where we're looking at 400 stores in Canada alone. And we're looking at the US, we're building down there, and it's a different country, different rules, different everything else. Mexico is the same.
Yeah. I would have loved. I know George. Would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that conversation where he said, "We're losing $1 million a year. What are we doing?" And you said, "Let's keep growing." So
Yes.
you said
And and you had to have the other thing with that, John. I had to have somebody that believed in me too, and I believed in him, and he believed in me. And the CEO at that time, or the president running the company, that was talking to George there, was acting like a partner. And he was the one that was sort of telling me we were losing money more than George was.
Yeah.
It was, but again, he was working there. You just keep working. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So that's where we got to, and it was the two of us made those directional changes, and it was nobody else.
So like you obviously know your strengths and your
Yes.
talent. And so once you had that infrastructure, you had a CEO, of course you had George. What is your entrepreneurial talent? Like and how did you use that to help grow Boston Pizza once you had a CEO in place and all of the org structure so you didn't have to do the day-to-day? What is that talent that you have and how did you use it?
Well, I think the talent comes from the people you hire. I mean, you can't, I've heard people say to me many times, you got, a great structure with your people. Your people seem to love working there and doing the things they wanted to do. But it was exciting because they could do their things. Once you didn't put hands on everything, you questioned everything. I remember going into Mark's office, and when I was in Toronto, and he was the vice president of operations for back east. And I walk in there one day and talking to him, and he said, "I want to do this." And I said, "Oh God, Mike, I don't think, Mark, I don't think that's going to work." He said, "Well, let me try it." So what do you say? No?
Yeah.
You say, yeah, try it. If it doesn't work, we're going to be having a conversation. And it worked. So those are the things you have to trust to the people you hire. You can't step into their boots. You can only ask them questions. And to me, that's part of the infrastructure that we have to do. We have a management team. I ask questions to them all the time, but I trust them when they do it. They do the stuff that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I said I had a great article written the other day, and I said it was published, and I look back, and the guy that wrote it was sitting across from me right now, and he was a guy that, with another guy sat. The article was great, but I signed it. Guess what? I sounded like I was a genius when it came to this. But you got to put the people in place that can do really well, and and look after them. That's what you want. And they become your family.
You just articulated one of the secret keys to scaling is getting the right team and being able to hire them. Is there a specific trait, like when you hire, is there a specific trait in everyone you hire? Like, what do you look for specifically? Is there one thing where if they have this, I'm going to stack the deck in odds of probability of making the right decision on that person?
I don't think there's any real. I think you can look at somebody and you look at their feeling, how they talk to you, how they respond, they come across to you. If you're meeting it from the first time, how are they going to react to something in the business down the road that well? So what I look at more than anything else is how do they treat people? How did they come across to me if I was going to be their partner? I treat them as my partner. I don't treat them as an employee. Employees are people that I don't know what employees are, but what I'm looking at is I want to work with these people and they want to work with me. Are they going to be able to put up with me? Number one. And number two, can I do the same with them? Are they giving me a message? Did they look me in the eye? Did they give me a straight answer? That's what I look at. I'm not an educated person. I can't sit here and say, well, you can tell me you got your MBA, and I'd say, yeah, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. MBA, I know it's something to do with masters, but I don't know any of that stuff. So what I look at that person and saying, when I asked him a question or she, how did they answer me back? Did they look me in the eye? Did they treat me that's not a foolish question? So I think that you have to look at that and get a feel. It's more of a gut feel than anything else. I said, you use your brain for smart stuff, use your gut for feel. And your heart for how you want to treat people. And to me, that's worked for me. It's worked for people that do that in a big way. It's how you treat your people. And you're part of the people. They're not employees. They're part of your family. So how do you treat your family? If you treat your family terrible, then I don't want you as an employee working with me. It's just not, it's not going to work. Because if you treat that, then everything else is, you tell me exactly what you're like at that
Yeah,
point.
it's good advice, I think. And I mean, you talk about partners. We have a lot of franchisees listening to this podcast as well, franchisees that are
Yeah.
members in the CFA. You guys have built a great culture at Boston Pizza.
Yes.
I mean, I've known franchisees in the past, great culture. I'm assuming you take that same philosophy. There are partners to your franchise system as you do to your employees. You want to talk about your franchisees for a bit and just how you go about building a relationship with them, and how important it is to you and the growth of Boston Pizza.
Well, we refer to it a lot as family. We've got a family of employees. I can't think of one franchisee across the country. Maybe they'll answer differently than I have, but I can't think of one family I wouldn't even stop in to see if I were in their area, that they wouldn't say, Jim, let's go for a drink, or let's go come over to the house, or whatever. That's how we operate. I've had people phone me from, we've got a franchisee, Linda McDonald's, up in Fort McMurray. And she right now is going through her 40th year. She was an EA in Edmonton for Mr. Coyle when she wanted to go into the business. I mean, she's got 2 stores. The 2 is the biggest volume stores you'd ever imagine in Boston Pizza. And has for years. And she's a little lady that went up there, and when she had opened her first restaurant, she couldn't make any money. She came back and threw the keys and said, Jim, crying. She says, I can't make any money. I got to get out of here. I said, you don't want to stay in Fort Mac? I'd love to stay in Fort Mac, but I can't make any money. I said, well, you got to get a bigger place. She says, easy for you to say. I said, well, yeah, but Linda, you can't keep up the volume. So she said, well, how am I going to do that? I said, now we can answer some questions. Now we can get it down to the bottom. That was 40 years ago. And today she's got 2 locations up there that do approximately 25 million a year.
Wow.
12 million each. And the other restaurant we took over was a restaurant that had gone broke. And that's when she got the big restaurant. And I got Ron Coyle, she was an EA originally within Edmonton before we bought the company. He put the money up for her to run that business. And her husband moved up there, and away she went. Their son is in the business as well. Again, I go back to family. It's how you treat the people, how you treat as a franchisee. Every one of them is like a cousin or a brother or whatever, or a sister or whatever to me. I don't treat them as a franchisee. Some of them have problems. You're working with, in most cases, you're working probably, if you had 10 stores, you're working for 10% of the guys at the bottom. So that's 1 or 2 stores. When you got 400 stores, you're working with 40 stores that are not going to be the same as the top. And you spend more time with them than you do with the up top, trying to make them survive. So I think that's what we've learned, or I've learned in the business. And so when somebody says, I got a problem, let's sit down, let's talk about it. Let's figure out how we can change it. Because that's what happened with me. When I was told in Ontario, I couldn't make it in Ontario, I took off and went to Hawaii. I sat there, I think I was going to be there for a month. I'm never going back to Ontario. I lasted a week, and then it came back, and I said, we were wrong. We did it wrong. We should have had somebody on the ground, and that person's me. So when I went back there, I hired the president or vice president to run that part of it. He in turn hired the people, and we sat there with 6 employees. That's how we started back there. And it worked.
Yeah, I mean, such a good lesson. I think so many franchisors, once they grow, they get past that 100 units, wherever that number is, compliance takes over the relationship. And clearly a hallmark of your success was that relationship you had with your franchisees. I have a core value in our own organization. We call it a friend in every city. When you do franchising right, you can go to any city in the country, call your franchisee up, go for a beer at Boston Pizza, and that's how to build a great franchise, become a great franchisor. You've obviously done it, so it's it's to the smallest. There's a guy that's holding a golf tournament. We've done in just outside of just north of Toronto and up towards Muskoka, where I had never been before. And he holds a golf tournament. He sends me a note 3 days ago, and he said, Jim, we'd love to have you down here if you can make it in your schedule. I'm going to try my hardest to be there. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, this is just one little deal. He said, it's not just for me. The whole town's going to go nuts when you come. But that's, to me, is because he's built that. He's being in part of that. You know, that's representing me and everybody else in the name of Boston Pizza. That's what makes it a success. Not me. It's, you know, when somebody says to me, you know, I was in your Boston Pizza the other day. No, you weren't in my Boston Pizza. You were in this guy's Boston Pizza or this lady's Boston Pizza. And I can talk to them if you've had a problem. But it's not my Boston Pizza.
Yeah, so good. I want to move on. You've had a couple forays into the international markets, U.S. I think was it Taiwan? I think you tried at some point or somewhere in Asia.
1980, we opened our first store in Taiwan in 1985. I'm sorry, 1987. It was after Expo 86. We thought we could go anywhere in the world. We did. We were very successful. We ended up with 7 stores there, 1 in Hong Kong and 1 in Japan back in the 80s. And then Tiananmen Square happened in China. And we decided that in our wisdom that we had a franchisee that was in Taiwan who had come from, actually he'd been working for Pizza Hut, Pizza Hut and McDonald's. And we thought he'd be a great one. And he turned out he wanted to get in the nightclub business. He ended up getting into the nightclub business, and he destroyed what we had. What we didn't do again was we didn't set up in that country to be successful. We kept flying back and forth. I was going on a plane probably every 3 to 5 weeks. I would spend a week there and then come back home.
Yeah.
Did it work? We were lined up. You couldn't believe how big the lineups we had. We're in the process of looking at going back. And now we're looking at it in a different light after we'd opened. When we came back here, we closed that down in 1994, just after Tiananmen Square, and got rid of the franchisee and then closed those stores. And we had one in Japan, which was with one of the biggest companies there called Sunstar. And but they didn't expand. So we just closed the store. And Hong Kong was owned by a broker. We had one in Simsatsu area, got to know the whole area. And but he was in the brokerage business. It was just a fun thing to take his family. And so we decided that we didn't do it right.
Right.
So that's when we came back and concentrated on Canada.
And I know there are a lot of franchisors in Canada that are all looking at going into the US. I know when we took our brand into the US, I mean, we had crushed the competition in Canada. We thought going to the US was going to be fairly easy because we were so much better than our American
welcome to the club, John.
Counterparts in Canada. And it took a lot longer and a lot more money to become successful for us in the US. Is there any bit of insight or advice you have for franchisors, either looking at the US or already in the US and needing to expand? What would you say to them?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the lessons you learn when you go across the border.
Yeah.
They may look like us. They may talk a little bit like us. They may act a little bit like us, but they're not us.
Amen.
And I'll tell you that I had the biggest lesson handed to me again because we got up to 70 stores in the U.S. We're at 30 right now. And that difference was the recession that went through there with easy borrowing, easy money.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize in checking our franchisees out at the time that a lot of them were having nothing, no skin in the game, as the saying goes.
Yeah.
So what was happening was they would come up and say, I've got a chunk, I love your franchise. I want to buy one. I'm going to put it next to my motel. I got an empty lot there. You can build a building. I can build a building, da-da-da-da-da. Our 70 stores, of all the stores we opened down there, we're all successful doing great food business. What we didn't realize is the debt load against the store and the motel. When the motel went down, we went down with it. So we lost over 34, I think it's 38 stores.
Wow.
The buildings are still there. They're somebody else is running them now, but they had nothing in the game. When we went to check and say, we're going to pull your franchise and you're going to charge, they declare bankruptcy. And next day they open another business. Like, it's not Canada. You wake up to the fact that you're dealing with Americans in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I remember sitting with one of our franchisees, and We were building a corporate store at the time. We just opened in Dallas, and that's where our office is to this day. We were sitting in there talking to a franchise or an investment bank and a franchisee, and they were saying, I heard the conversation going back and forth. And she said, well, I need 120. And he said, well, I can give you out 110. And I walked away and I never thought, well, she wants $110,000. It wasn't that. It was 110% financing she was asking for. They were getting 110. I said, well, what's I thought it went to 100. She said, oh, no, I got an extra 10, but that was due to the losses for the next. So she had nothing in the business.
Yeah.
So when they closed, they were just like out the next day.
Away. Yeah.
So they walk away. Now we got 20 solid franchises. Are we making money for the first time? And then in the last, say, 2.5 years, we've cut back on everything we've done to now start franchising, and they pay your bills as you go. But here's the deal. You have to have at least 20% in the business before we talk to you.
Well, yeah, it's really, we're going back to consumer behavior again.
Exactly.
And we look at like the franchisee in the US, they're freewheeling, much more liberal than we are in Canada. They gamble. And, you know, I found.
But the other thing, John, there's no consequences.
No, you're right.
If they close like your company or my company, they walk away tomorrow morning and they go and get another one.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, here, I remember taking a very good friend of mine in Dallas, and he wanted to get into another company I'm involved in with a hockey business. And we were turning around, and I said, I'll put you on the board of directors because, you know, we got a public company. And so he said, sure, I'd love to be in there. So I went through his background like you would in Canada, and he gone broke twice, declared personal bankruptcy. Well, in Canada, you can't be on a board.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And he finally, because I hadn't called him back in 10 days, he phoned me back. He said, oh, I guess you read my bio and it showed I said, yeah, I did. I said, I don't know what the heck to say. I said, I can't put you on the board. He said, yeah, you can. He said, I'll tell you what, I got more money in my American Express than you do. He did.
He did. That's incredible.
But that's what the mentality is in the US.
Yeah.
We learned the rules. Once we learned the rules, we started and we invest a lot of money down there, and we lost a lot of money, but we're still there. We're working hard on it. We got a president that we think is the right guy. We're moving along. We're selling franchise. We're opening more stores this year. We'll open 3 or 4 this year. We're going to take it slow and build it back up. And I think in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be somewhere back to where we were before.
Good.
Mexico was the opposite. We opened in Mexico. They bought the franchise at a dinner or at a restaurant show and thought it was, they looked all over in Boston, couldn't figure out where the company was from. But they bought this thing that we were selling at a booth. And we opened 20 years ago in Mexico with 1 store in Merida, Mexico, in the interior, which is, you know, there's no tourists, or not many tourists there. And now we've got 20 stores there. Awesome. And they're very, very, very successful. Good.
I'm glad to hear. I want to see you succeed in the U.S. for sure. I want to ask. I know we're coming up to time fairly soon. Dragon Den days. I want to know what you look for when a franchise system is presenting. What do you look for in a franchise system to invest in a franchise system when they're on the Dragon's Den?
The same thing as I said to you earlier about how does this person react when you ask them the questions, or they did. And what we did, and I look at the successful ones we have. One is a local one that's from the Vancouver, Okanagan Valley. We started out of here. They came in onto the show with 1 truck. They brought the whole truck up to the 10th floor where we shoot Dragon's Den. And they had a black and red vehicle called Bellafix. And they pitched this on the basis of having this truck that was going to come to your house and fix your bicycles.
Yeah.
I looked at the guys and talked to them, and they were genuine in my mind. I was going with my gut.
Yeah.
They were from the Okanagan. 1 guy was from the Okanagan, 2 guys from Vancouver. They know the system. They're in Toronto giving me this with 1 store, 1 truck. Today, they've got over close to 200 trucks. They're all through the U.S. And if you ever want your bike fixed, that's the company to go and talk to.
Yeah.
And they're very successful. But what they wanted was a franchise person that had done this before. And that's why picked me over the other dragons that were all wanting into the deal. That they got me.
Good brand. That's right. Okay, so I want to know what excites you now. Like what's left for you? What's next? What excites you these days?
I think lots of deals and deals I'm looking at in the restaurant, how we can change to make it better. How, I believe, and I looked at our people and I said, we're up to close to 400 stores now in Canada. How many more can we build? We're not in the city, but that's a whole bunch of stores we can build in city now. So we did a couple, one at the stadium in Vancouver, one at Front and John in Toronto. They're big stores, the Blue Jays and the Leafs and the Canucks, when they're playing out here, we're busy. We're a sports bar type feel to it. So people can go there after a game or whatever. That's what we think we can build. When they came back and said to our study that was done across Canada to our operational people, they said, you could build, there's another 100 sites we think you can build in Canada. And we're coast to coast. We're from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
The one territory we're not is Nunavut, and we're going to get to Nunavut.
Good.
Trust me. We're in the Yukon. Why not? And that's what excites me, is to seeing new blood coming in, new franchise coming in. We're pushing like crazy in the US. We're pushing like crazy in Mexico. I've got our management team working on Europe and back into Asia again. So I got a lot of things to do yet.
A lot to do. That's good. I'm glad to hear. You're not going to slow down at all. I can tell that. My one last question. I think it's just so valuable to the CFA community to have founders like you, who have such a high stature in this country, have built a legendary system to be part of the CFA. So I guess my last question, you've been a CFA member for so long now. Why have you remained a member of the CFA? Why are you still part of this organization?
Well, I think we as a franchise company want to have an association with something that fits into our model. The Canadian Franchise Association is one of the best things that ever happened in this country, because we were all a bunch of people running around. We're in the restaurant business. Well, we weren't really in the restaurant business. We're in the franchise business. And then we're in the restaurant business. And you don't have to be just in restaurants. And that's what it is with the franchise, what I think with Canadian Franchise Association. CFA has been huge for us. We talk to people there. We hear they hear our problems. They hear their problems in doing stuff. And it's just a transfer of information back and forth that helps us all. It's not all about one person or one group. I'm not afraid of walking in and telling people, this is what worked for us. I don't know what's that's going to work for you. Yeah. But that's, at least we're having the conversation. And that's what the CFA is good. And that's why we believe, and we have not me on the board all the time. It's the franchise guys that are sitting in day-to-day business. It's right now, Jordan Holmes sits and loves getting involved with this because it delivers to the other franchisees the problems we saw and what we solved. And I listen to the smallest guy starting out, and they come back and say, you know what he's doing in 2 or 3 of his sites? All that stuff is the stuff that we build up, and that's what makes that CFA strong.
Yeah, good. Well,
if you're in the restaurant business or any business in franchise, you get into the CFA, is my say.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Jim, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sponsoring my hockey teams growing up. Thank you for making an unbelievable pizza. Some of my favorite. It's always been my favorite pizza. And I guess most importantly, thank you for being such a powerful spokesperson for franchising in this country. We are grateful to you. Thanks for being here. And I will send you my picture of my Boston Pizza Brutes hockey when you send me the hangman picture of you wrestling.
Oh, yeah. I think you're going to have to wait a long time for my picture to go that way. But, I sort of got rid of them before my kids came along, because they still laugh at me every time I talk about it. But the guys there may be one dug around Calgary or Edmonton somewhere. I don't know. I haven't seen one for a long, long time. But anyway, I'd love to see the Brute picture. That to me that was actually started by a young lady that worked for me, that worked in Edmonton. We had her come out and work at our store in Penticton, and she made that sandwich up, and she said, it's a brute of a sandwich. And that's how we put it on the menu. So there's a server that was working, a young lady, and she was the one that was her lunch every day. So she made it, and we put it on the menu.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. Thank you, Jim, very much.
Thank you very much, John. It was appreciated. Really, really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.